The small town of Black Hollow was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests, it looked like something out of an old postcard. Quaint houses with creaky porches, cobblestone streets that had seen better days, in a general store that sold everything from canned beans to hand-knitted scarves. But beneath its charming exterior lay a darker side, one whispered about in hushed tones late at night or hinted at during quiet conversations over steaming cups of coffee. For as long as anyone could remember, there were stories about Emily Carter. She wasn't just another name etched into a weathered tombstone. She was a legend, a ghost story passed down through generations. Some said her spirit wandered the cemetery after midnight, searching for something or someone. Others claimed they'd heard faint cries echoing from the woods near her grave on stormy nights. Whether these tales were true or simply products of overactive imaginations didn't matter much to the people of Black Hollow. What mattered was that Emily's memory lingered, casting a shadow over the town that no amount of sunshine could dispel. Clara Bennett had lived in Black Hollow all her life, but she never paid much attention to the rumors about Emily. To Clara, the stories were nothing more than folklore designed to scare children into behaving. As a local historian, her focus was on facts, not fiction. She spent most of her days buried in dusty archives, piecing together fragments of the town's past. Her work kept her busy, and she liked it that way. It gave her purpose, even if it meant spending hours alone in dimly lit rooms filled with the smell of aged paper and ink. But lately, things had changed. The town council announced plans to expand a nearby road, which would cut right through the old cemetery where Emily was buried. Naturally, this sparked outrage among residents who believed disturbing sacred ground was bad luck. Clara understood their concerns, but she also knew progress couldn't be stopped forever. When the council approached her to oversee the exhumation process, she reluctantly agreed. After all, someone needed to ensure the remains were handled respectfully, and who better than her? On the morning of the excavation, Clara arrived at the cemetery feeling uneasy. The air was thick with fog, clinging to the trees and gravestones, like a shroud. A team of workers stood ready, their tools glinting in the weak sunlight filtering through the mist. They exchanged nervous glances, clearly aware of the superstitions surrounding Emily's grave. Clara tried to ignore the tension in the air as she walked toward the headstone marked Emily Carter, 1975-1998. The letters were worn but still legible, a stark reminder of how young Emily had been when she died. As the digging began, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking between the gravestones, but the only movement came from the workers shoveling dirt. Still, the unease gnawed at her, growing stronger with each passing minute. Maybe it was the eerie atmosphere or the weight of what they were doing, disturbing the final resting place of someone whose life ended so tragically. But whatever it was, it made her stomach churn. Hours passed, and the workers finally reached the coffin. Carefully, they lifted it from the earth and placed it on the ground. Clara leaned in closer, expecting to see signs of decay or remnants of clothing inside. Instead, she froze. The coffin was empty. There was no body, no bones, nothing but a thin layer of dust coating the bottom. For a moment, everyone was silent, staring at the hollow box as if waiting for it to explain itself. Then chaos erupted. The workers began murmuring among themselves, some crossing themselves while others muttered prayers under their breath. One man dropped his shovel and backed away, muttering something about curses. Clara raised her hands, trying to calm them down. "It's okay," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. There has to be a logical explanation for this. Despite her words, doubt crept into her mind. How could a coffin be empty? Had Emily's body been moved years ago without anyone knowing? Or was there something else going on, something far stranger than she cared to imagine? Before she could dwell too much on those questions, one of the workers called out. He pointed to a corner of the grave, where something gleamed faintly in the dirt. Kneeling down, Clara brushed away the soil with trembling fingers until she uncovered a small metal box. It was rusted and dented, but intact. Inside, Wrapped in a faded blue ribbon were several letters. The handwriting on the envelopes was delicate yet deliberate, unmistakably feminine. Clara's heart raced as she opened the first letter. The words leaped off the page, written in a tone both desperate and defiant. "If you're reading this," it began, "then I'm already gone. But please don't let them get away with what they've done." The letter went on to describe events Clara barely recognized, a web of lies, betrayal, and danger lurking beneath the surface of Black Hollow. By the time she finished reading, her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Whatever secrets Emily had, taken to her grave, were now coming to light, and Clara realized she might be the only one willing to uncover the truth. The discovery of the empty coffin and the mysterious bundle of letters sent shockwaves through the small group gathered at Emily Carter's gravesite. The workers, who had been uneasy from the start, now looked downright terrified. Some muttered prayers under their breath, while others crossed themselves repeatedly as if trying to ward off an unseen evil. Clara Bennett stood frozen, clutching the rusted metal box in her hands. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears, drowning out the murmurs around her. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something far bigger than she'd anticipated, something that could change everything about Black Hollow's history. Clara carefully unwrapped the faded blue ribbon binding the letters together. The paper was brittle with age, yellowed and fragile as though it might crumble at the slightest touch. She handled them delicately, spreading them out on a makeshift table nearby. One by one, she began reading, her eyes scanning the delicate handwriting that belonged to Emily herself. Each letter was dated, written over the course of several months leading up to her death. As Clara read, a chilling picture began to emerge. A young woman caught in a web of secrets, lies, and danger, desperately trying to expose the truth before it was too late. The first letter opened with a plea. "If you're reading this, then I'm already gone. But please don't let them get away with what they've done." The words were haunting, filled with urgency and fear. Emily described how she had stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to know, an illegal operation involving some of the most powerful people in Black Hollow. At first, she didn't understand the full scope of what she'd uncovered. It started with overhearing conversations between two men at a local diner, cryptic remarks about shipments and payments. Curiosity got the better of her, and she began digging deeper, piecing together fragments of information until the horrifying reality became clear. Emily wrote about how she discovered that certain members of the town's elite were involved in smuggling stolen goods, antiques, jewelry, even rare artifacts, through Black Hollow. They used the dense forest surrounding the town as cover, moving their illicit cargo under the noses of unsuspecting residents. What made it worse was that these weren't just random criminals, they were pillars of the community. Men like Richard Grayson, the former mayor, and Victor Langston, a wealthy businessman whose family name was practically synonymous with Black Hollow itself. These were people everyone trusted, people who shaped the town's identity. And yet, according to Emily, they were rotten to the core. As Clara continued reading, she realized Emily hadn't stopped there. Once she understood the extent of the corruption, she tried to gather evidence, photographs, documents, anything that could prove what was happening. But the deeper she dug, the more dangerous things became. In one letter, Emily confessed she was being followed. Shadows moved outside her window at night, and strange cars parked down her street for no apparent reason. She stopped trusting even her closest friends, afraid they might inadvertently betray her. "I feel like a ghost in my own life," she wrote. "Everyone smiles at me, but I know they're lying. I can see it in their eyes." The final letter was the most heartbreaking. Written just days before her supposed accidental death, Emily begged someone named Jonah to help her. She implored him to take the evidence she'd collected and make sure the world knew the truth if anything happened to her. "Jonah, you're the only one I trust," she wrote. "Please promise me you'll do this. Don't let them win." The desperation in her words was palpable, as if she knew her time was running out. Clara couldn't help but wonder if Jonah had ever received the letters, or if he'd simply chosen to stay silent. By the time Clara finished reading, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cemetery. The air grew colder and the fog thickened, wrapping around the gravestones like a suffocating blanket. She looked up to find the workers packing up their tools, eager to leave the eerie scene behind. None of them met her gaze directly. They avoided the grave altogether, as if afraid to look at it for too long. Clara didn't blame them. If she hadn't been so determined to uncover the truth, she might have fled herself. But curiosity burned inside her, hotter than ever. Who was Jonah? And why had Emily trusted him above anyone else? More importantly, what had happened to the evidence Emily claimed to have gathered? Clara knew she couldn't answer these questions alone. She needed help, but she also knew she couldn't trust just anyone. Word of the discovery would spread quickly in a town like Black Hollow, and not everyone would welcome the idea of old skeletons being dragged out of the closet. Some might even try to stop her. That night, Clara took the letters home, locking them safely in a drawer in her desk. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, staring out at the darkened streets. The town seemed quieter than usual, almost eerily so. Every creak of the floorboards or rustle of leaves outside made her jump. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Had Emily really been murdered to keep her quiet? And if so, who was responsible? Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a minefield, where one wrong move could blow everything apart. The next morning, Clara decided to visit the town archives. She spent hours poring over old newspapers and records, searching for any mention of Emily's death. According to official reports, she had died in a car accident, a tragic twist of fate that left the town mourning the loss of such a bright young woman. But as Clara dug deeper, inconsistencies began to surface. The details of the crash were vague, almost deliberately so. There were no witnesses, no photographs of the wreckage, and no clear explanation of how it happened. Even the coroner's report raised red flags, listing her cause of death as blunt force trauma, but offering little else in terms clearer way to explain how she sustained those injuries. Clara's suspicions deepened when she found a brief article buried in the back pages of a local paper. It mentioned an anonymous tip claiming that Emily had been investigating corruption in Black Hollow shortly before her death. The article was vague, almost dismissive, as if the reporter hadn't taken the claim seriously. But to Clara, it was a crucial piece of the puzzle. Someone else had known what Emily was doing and had tried to warn the public, albeit quietly. As the day wore on, Clara's exhaustion gave way to determination. She couldn't let this go. Emily's voice, silenced for 20 years, was finally speaking again, and Clara owed it to her to listen. But she also knew she was treading dangerous ground. Whoever had orchestrated Emily's death was still out there, living their life untouched by guilt or consequence. And if they caught wind of what Clara was doing, there was no telling what lengths they might go to in order to protect their secrets. Before leaving the archives, Clara made one final discovery. Buried in a dusty corner of the room was a photograph of Emily, smiling brightly alongside a man Clara assumed was Jonah. His face was familiar, though she couldn't quite place it. Something about his expression, the mix of admiration and concern in his eyes, made her pause. He looked like someone who cared deeply for Emily, someone who might have been willing to risk everything to help her. Clara snapped a picture of the photo with her phone, resolving to track him down as soon as possible. On her way home, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder several times, half expecting to see someone following her. The streets were empty save for the occasional flicker of light from a passing car. Still, the sensation lingered, prickling the back of her neck like a warning. Whatever she had stumbled upon, it was far from over. In fact, it felt like the beginning of something much blurry. The photograph of Emily and Jonah haunted Clara as she drove home. It wasn't just the familiarity of his face that unsettled her. It was the weight of what it represented. Jonah had been close to Emily, trusted by her in a way few others were. If anyone knew the truth about what happened to her, it would be him. But finding him wouldn't be easy. Black Hollow was a small town, but people had a way of disappearing when they wanted to. And if Jonah had chosen to stay out of the spotlight for 20 years, he might not welcome someone digging up the past. Clara spent the evening poring over old records, trying to piece together any information she could find about Jonah. The archives provided scraps, a high school yearbook photo, a mention in a local newspaper article about a community art project, but nothing substantial. She learned his full name, Jonah Turner. He'd been an artist known around town for his paintings of Black Hollow's landscapes. After Emily's death, however, he seemed to vanish from public life. His name stopped appearing in event listings, and there were no more updates on his work. It was as though he'd faded into obscurity, retreating into the shadows while the rest of the town moved on. Determined to track him down, Clara decided to visit the places he used to frequent. Her first stop was the old art gallery on Main Street, where Jonah had once displayed his work. The building was still standing, though it now housed a bakery. Stepping inside, Clara was greeted by the warm scent of freshly baked bread and cookies. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver hair tied neatly into a bun. Clara introduced herself and asked if she remembered Jonah Turner. The woman's eyes softened with recognition. Jonah? Of course I remember him, she said, leaning against the counter. He was such a talented young man. His paintings captured the soul of this town like no one else's ever did. She paused, her expression turning wistful. But after Emily passed away, he changed. He stopped coming here, stopped showing his work altogether. Heard he moved to the edge of town, lives alone now. Clara thanked the woman and left with a renewed sense of purpose. Armed with this new information, she headed toward the outskirts of Black Hollow, where the forest grew thicker and the houses became fewer. After asking around at a gas station and a roadside diner, she finally found the address she was looking for, a small weathered cabin tucked away among towering pine trees. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the front yard was cluttered with stacks of firewood and rusted tools. As Clara approached the door, she hesitated. What would she say to him? Would he even want to talk to her? Taking a deep breath, she knocked firmly. For a moment there was silence. Then the door creaked open, revealing a tall, wiry man with graying hair and piercing blue eyes. He looked older than Clara expected, but there was something familiar about his face. The same intensity she'd seen in the photograph. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice rough but not unfriendly. Clara introduced herself, explaining why. She was there. At first, Jonah seemed reluctant to engage. His jaw tightened and he glanced over his shoulder as though expecting someone, or something, to appear behind him. But when Clara mentioned Emily's letters, something shifted in his demeanor. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. The interior of the cabin was simple, yet cozy. Paintings leaned against every available surface, landscapes of black, hollows, hills, and rivers, portraits of people long forgotten. A pot of coffee simmered on the stove, filling the room with its rich aroma. Jonah gestured for Clara to sit at a wooden table littered with sketchbooks and brushes. As she settled into a chair, he poured 2 cups of coffee and joined her. "I haven't thought about Emily in years," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "Not because I didn't care, but because it hurt too much." He stared into his cup, as if searching for answers in the swirling liquid. She was incredible, so full of life, so determined to make things right. When she told me what she'd discovered, I begged her to let it go, but she wouldn't listen. She said she couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent. Clara listened intently, her heart aching for the pain etched into Jonah's words. "What exactly did she discover?" she asked gently. Jonah sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It started with rumors. Whispers about stolen goods being smuggled through town. At first, Emily didn't think much of it. But then she saw things. Documents, photographs, conversations she wasn't supposed to overhear. She pieced it all together and realized some of the most powerful men in Black Hollow were involved. They weren't just stealing. They were exploiting the town, using its resources and its people to line their own pockets." He paused, his gaze distant. "Emily wanted to expose them. She thought if she could gather enough evidence, she could bring them down. But they found out. I don't know how. They must have been watching her, but they knew. One night she came to me, terrified. She said she'd been followed, that someone had broken into her house. She gave me a folder, told me to keep it safe. Said she trusted me more than anyone else. Clara's pulse quickened. Do you still have it? Jonah shook his head. No. I hid it somewhere safe, but... His voice trailed off, and he looked away. After she died, I went back to get it. It was gone. Whoever took it covered their tracks well. I couldn't prove anything. That's when I realized I was in danger too. So I disappeared. I stopped painting, stopped talking to people. I figured, if I stayed quiet, they'd leave me alone. The room fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. Clara felt a surge of anger, not at Jonah, but at the injustice of it all. Emily had risked everything to uncover the truth, only to be silenced, and Jonah, burdened by guilt and fear, had retreated into solitude, carrying the secret alone. What do you think happened to her? Clara asked quietly. Jonah's eyes darkened. I don't think it was an accident. Not for a second. They killed her, Clara. They made it look like a car crash, but we both know better. She was murdered because she got too close to the truth. His words sent a chill down Clara's spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed aloud was different. It solidified her resolve. She couldn't let Emily's death remain a mystery. She owed it to her, and to Jonah, to seek justice. Do you know who was involved? She pressed. Jonah hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty and fear. Finally, he nodded. Grayson and Langston, he said, naming the two men Clara had already suspected. They're the ones pulling the strings. Back then, they controlled everything. The council, the businesses, even the police. Nothing happened in this town without their approval, and anyone who stood in their way. He trailed off, leaving the implication unspoken. Clara thanked Jonah for his honesty, promising to handle the situation carefully. Before leaving, she asked if he'd be willing to share more details or testify if necessary. He agreed reluctantly, though it was clear the idea terrified him. As she drove back to town, Clara replayed their conversation in her mind, piecing together the fragments of Emily's story. She now had names, motives, and a clearer understanding of the conspiracy. But she also knew she was walking a dangerous path. Grayson and Langston were still influential figures, their power undiminished by time. Exposing them wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be safe. That night, Clara sat at her desk, staring at the letters and the photograph of Emily and Jonah. She felt a strange mix of dread and determination. The truth was within reach, but bringing it to light would require courage and caution. She vowed to honor Emily's memory no matter the cost. The next morning, Clara woke up with a sense of purpose that bordered on obsession. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but she knew she needed more than just letters and memories to confront men like Richard Grayson and Victor Langston. These were people who had spent decades building their reputations, weaving webs of influence so tightly that even the smallest tug could cause chaos. Clara understood that exposing them wouldn't just require evidence, it would demand strategy, precision, and an unshakable resolve. She began by revisiting the archives, this time focusing on anything related to Grayson and Langston. Their names appeared frequently in old newspaper clippings, always accompanied by glowing praise for their contributions to Black Hollow. Charity events, business expansions, civic projects, they were painted as model citizens, pillars of the community. But beneath the polished surface, Clara found cracks. Small inconsistencies here and there hinted at something darker. For instance, several articles mentioned mysterious donations from anonymous sources funding town improvements during times when the local economy was struggling. Other reports casually noted the sudden disappearance of certain outspoken critics or whistleblowers who had questioned the two men's practices. One name stood out repeatedly: Thomas Reed. He had been a journalist working for the Black Hollow Gazette, known for his investigative pieces on corruption, According to records, he had planned to publish a major exposé about illegal activities tied to prominent figures in town. But the article never saw the light of day. Instead, Reed vanished without a trace, leaving behind only cryptic notes, scribbled in shorthand. Clara couldn't help but wonder if his fate mirrored Emily's. Was he silenced because he got too close to the truth? As she dug deeper, Clara noticed patterns emerging. Many of the incidents involving missing persons or suspicious accidents occurred around key moments when Grayson and Langston faced potential scrutiny. It was almost as if they had a sixth sense for danger, preemptively eliminating threats before they materialized. The realization sent a chill down her spine. If these men had orchestrated Emily's death, and possibly others, then they were far more dangerous than she had initially imagined. Clara decided it was time to gather concrete proof. She reached out to a journalist friend named Sarah Collins, who worked for a regional newspaper based in the city. Sarah was skeptical at first, dismissing Clara's claims as conspiracy theories. But when Clara shared the letters and recounted Jonah's testimony, Sarah agreed to look into it further. Together, they devised a plan. Clara would focus on gathering evidence locally, while Sarah would investigate Grayson and Langston's broader connections outside Black Hollow. They hoped that combining their efforts might finally reveal the full extent of the corruption. Over the next few days, Clara scoured every available resource, piecing together fragments of information. She visited the courthouse, combing through dusty files of property deeds and tax records. What she found was startling. Several properties owned by Grayson and Langston had been purchased under false names, likely used as fronts for their illicit operations. Additionally, bank statements obtained through a contact at the local credit union showed unusually large sums of money being transferred to offshore accounts. Each discovery added another layer to the intricate web of deceit surrounding the two men. But the closer Clara got to the truth, the more uneasy she felt. She started noticing strange things happening around her. Her car tires were slashed one evening after visiting the archives. A rock shattered her bedroom window late at night, accompanied by a note taped to it that read, "Stop digging." Even her phone seemed to malfunction sporadically, calls dropping mid-conversation or texts failing to send. Someone or some group was watching her, sending clear warnings to back off. Despite the intimidation tactics, Clara refused to give up. She confided in Jonah, asking if he'd ever experienced similar threats. To her surprise, he admitted he had. Shortly after Emily's death, someone broke into his studio and destroyed most of his paintings. Anonymous letters arrived at his doorstep, accusing him of spreading lies and threatening harm if he didn't leave town. He eventually retreated into solitude, hoping to avoid further trouble. Hearing his story made Clara realize how deep-rooted the fear was in Black Hollow, a collective silence enforced by power and violence. Determined to break that silence, Clara arranged a meeting with Grayson and Langston themselves. She figured confronting them directly might yield valuable insights, or at least confirm her suspicions. Armed with copies of the letters and her findings, she requested an audience under the guise of discussing historical preservation efforts in the cemetery. Both men agreed, perhaps unaware of what she truly intended. The meeting took place in the town hall, a grand yet aging building filled with echoes of Black Hollow's past. Clara sat across from Grayson and Langston, their faces calm but guarded. Grayson, now in his late 70s, exuded an air of authority, his sharp eyes scanning Clara like a hawk sizing up its prey. Langston, slightly younger but no less intimidating, leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of him. Despite their outward composure, Clara sensed unease beneath the surface. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me," Clara began, keeping her tone polite but firm. "As you know, recent developments have brought attention to the cemetery, particularly Emily Carter's grave." Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Yes, unfortunate business. We've been assured the matter will be handled discreetly." "Handled? Discreetly?" Clara echoed, leaning forward slightly. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Langston interjected smoothly. "We're simply ensuring minimal disruption to the community. Emotional attachments run deep in a town like ours." Clara nodded, pretending to agree, then slid the photocopies of Emily's letters across the table. These were found buried with her coffin. I believe they shed light on why emotions run so high. Both men stiffened visibly as they glanced at the documents. Grayson's face flushed red while Langston's jaw tightened. Neither spoke immediately, but the tension in the room was palpable. These letters suggest Emily uncovered evidence of illegal activities involving certain members of this town, Clara continued, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Activities that may have led to her untimely death. Grayson slammed his hand on the table, his composure cracking. This is preposterous. You're dredging up baseless accusations against respected individuals. And yet, Clara countered, the details align remarkably well with other incidents over the years. Missing journalists, suspicious accidents, anonymous donations. Doesn't it all seem a bit convenient? For a moment, neither man responded. Then Langston leaned forward, his expression cold and calculating. Miss Bennett, let me offer you some advice. Sometimes it's best to leave the past undisturbed. Pursuing this line of inquiry won't end well for anyone. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine, but she held her ground. I'm not afraid of the truth, she said firmly, and I think the people of Black Hollow deserve to hear it. The meeting ended abruptly, with Grayson and Langston excusing themselves without another word. As Clara packed up her things, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever happened next, she knew she was playing a dangerous game. But she also knew she couldn't stop now. Emily's voice had been silenced for 20 years, but Clara was determined to make sure it was heard loud and clear. The confrontation with Grayson and Langston left Clara shaken but resolute. Their thinly veiled threats only strengthened her determination to expose the truth. She knew she was treading dangerous ground, but the stakes were too high to back down now. Emily's voice, silenced for 2 decades, deserved to be heard, and Clara felt a deep responsibility to ensure it reached the world. Over the next few days, Clara worked tirelessly alongside Sarah Collins, the journalist from the city. Together, they compiled all the evidence Clara had gathered: Emily's letters, property records, bank statements, and Thomas Reed's cryptic notes. They cross-referenced details, piecing together a timeline that painted a damning picture of corruption and complicity in Black Hollow. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Grayson and Langston weren't acting alone. A network of accomplices, town officials, business owners, even law enforcement officers, had helped them maintain their grip on the town for years. Clara and Sarah decided to take their findings public. They drafted an exposé detailing the illegal activities tied to Grayson and Langston, along with the suspicious deaths and disappearances linked to their operations. To protect themselves, they shared copies of the documents with trusted colleagues outside Black Hollow, ensuring the story would see the light of day, even if something happened to them. Every step forward felt like walking a tightrope. One misstep could mean disaster. But as much as Clara tried to stay focused, paranoia began creeping into her daily life. She noticed cars parked outside her house at odd hours, their occupants watching silently from behind tinted windows. Her phone buzzed incessantly with unknown numbers, though no one spoke when she answered. Even mundane errands felt fraught with tension. Every glance from a stranger seemed loaded with meaning. It was exhausting, living under constant surveillance, but Clara reminded herself why she was doing this. For Emily. For justice. One evening, while reviewing the final draft of the exposé, Clara received an unexpected visitor. Jonah Turner stood on her doorstep, his face pale and drawn. "We need to talk," he said urgently. His tone sent a jolt of alarm through her. She ushered him inside, closing the curtains before turning to face him. "What's wrong?" she asked. Jonah hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. I made a mistake," he admitted finally. "After Emily died, I thought staying quiet was the safest thing to do. But now..." He trailed off, running a hand through his graying hair. "Now I realize I've been part of the problem." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Jonah sighed heavily. "There's something I didn't tell you before. Something about the night Emily died. He paused, his eyes clouded with guilt. She called me, frantic. She said someone was following her, that she needed help. I told her to meet me at my studio, but by the time I got there, it was too late. Her car was gone, and so was she. Clara's heart sank. Did you report it? Call the police? He shook his head, shame etched into his features. No. I panicked. I convinced myself it was safer not to get involved. By the time I realized how wrong I was, it was already over. They'd spun their story about the accident and everyone believed it. His confession hit Clara like a punch to the gut. Part of her wanted to be angry with him for his silence, but another part understood. Fear had paralyzed him, just as it had paralyzed so many others in Black Hollow. Still, his revelation added urgency to their mission. If Jonah had known the truth all along and done nothing, then the burden of making things right fell squarely on Clara's shoulders. We can fix this, Clara said firmly, trying to reassure both of them. The article is almost ready. Once it's published, there won't be any going back. Jonah nodded, though his expression remained grim. Just be careful, he warned. These people, they won't hesitate to hurt you if they think you're a threat. The next morning, Clara woke up to a chilling sight. Her front yard littered with shredded papers. Someone had broken into her car overnight and destroyed the hard copies of the exposé she'd been working on. Pages fluttered in the wind, torn and illegible. Her laptop, thankfully, remained untouched. It was password protected and stored in a safe place. But the message was clear. Whoever had done this knew exactly what she was planning, and they were determined to stop her. Furious but undeterred, Clara contacted Sarah immediately. "They're onto us," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and defiance. "We need to move faster." Sarah agreed, promising to finalize the article and send it to her editor within 24 hours. In the meantime, Clara doubled down on her efforts to rally support within the community. She reached out to trusted friends and acquaintances, sharing snippets of the story and urging them to speak out if the article sparked controversy. Some were hesitant, afraid of retaliation, but others pledged their backing. Slowly but surely, a small coalition began to form, a group of ordinary citizens willing to stand up against the powerful forces that had long controlled Black Hollow. By the third day, the exposé was complete, titled, "Beneath the Surface: Corruption and Cover-Ups in Black Hollow." It laid bare the dark secrets hidden beneath the town's picturesque facade. The article detailed Emily Carter's investigation, her untimely death, and the web of deceit orchestrated by Grayson, Langston, and their associates. It included copies of key documents, photographs of suspicious properties, and testimonies from whistleblowers who had come forward after hearing rumors of the impending publication. As soon as the article went live online, the reaction was explosive. Social media lit up with outrage as residents of Black Hollow grappled with the revelations. People who had once dismissed Emily's death as an accident now questioned everything they thought they knew. Local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach. Within hours, the entire town was buzzing with shock and disbelief. Grayson and Langston issued a joint statement denying the allegations, calling the exposé a malicious attack fueled by baseless speculation. But their denials rang hollow. The evidence was overwhelming, and the tide of public opinion was turning against them. Calls for accountability grew louder, with petitions demanding investigations into their activities circulating rapidly. For Clara, the sense of vindication was bittersweet. On one hand, she felt a surge of pride knowing that Emily's voice had finally been heard. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the hostility brewing beneath the surface. Threats poured in, from anonymous messages online to menacing phone calls late at night. Someone even spray-painted graffiti on her garage door, labeling her a traitor. Yet despite the backlash, Clara refused to retreat. She attended town hall meetings, speaking passionately about the importance of transparency and justice. Her courage inspired others to join the fight, transforming what had started as a lone crusade into a collective movement. Meanwhile, legal authorities began taking notice. State investigators arrived in Black Hollow, launching inquiries into the claims made in the exposé. Grayson and Langston found themselves under intense scrutiny, their once unassailable reputations crumbling under the weight of mounting accusations. While they avoided immediate arrest due to lack of direct evidence tying them to specific crimes, the damage to their influence was undeniable. Businesses pulled partnerships, allies distanced themselves, and whispers of scandal followed them wherever they went. Through it all, Clara leaned on Jonah for support. Though he still struggled with guilt over his role, or lack thereof, in Emily's death, he threw himself into helping Clara navigate the chaos. Together, they attended interviews, provided additional evidence to investigators, and encouraged others to come forward with information. Their partnership became a symbol of resilience, proof that even those haunted by the past could rise above it to seek justice. As weeks turned into months, the dust began to settle in Black Hollow. The exposé marked the beginning of a reckoning, forcing the town to confront truths it had buried for far too long. While Grayson and Langston managed to evade prison sentences, their power was irreparably broken. New leadership emerged, committed to rebuilding trust and fostering transparency. And though scars remained, the town slowly began to heal. For Clara, the journey wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about honoring Emily's legacy. She often visited the cemetery, sitting quietly by the empty grave where it had all begun. Each time she left flowers and a whispered promise, "Your voice will never be silenced again." The aftermath of the exposé transformed Black Hollow in ways no one could have predicted. What had once been a town shrouded in secrecy and fear began to emerge into the light, its people slowly reclaiming their voices. The story of Emily Carter became a rallying cry, a symbol of courage and resilience that inspired others to speak out against injustice. For Clara Bennett, the journey was far from over, but it had brought her closer to a sense of peace than she'd ever thought possible. In the weeks following the publication, the town buzzed with activity. State investigators worked tirelessly, sifting through decades of buried evidence. They interviewed residents, reviewed financial records, and even exhumed other graves suspected of hiding secrets similar to Emily's. While not every case yielded answers, the process itself was cathartic for many. People who had spent years living in silence finally felt empowered to share their stories, knowing they wouldn't face retribution alone. Grayson and Langston, though still free, were shadows of their former selves. Their names, once synonymous with power and prestige, now carried the weight of shame. Businesses they had built crumbled under scrutiny as partners severed ties and customers boycotted their services. Even those who had once blindly supported them began to distance themselves, unwilling to be tainted by association. The two men retreated from public life, rarely seen outside their homes. Rumors circulated that they were planning to leave Black Hollow altogether, seeking refuge in anonymity elsewhere. But Clara knew true justice wasn't about vengeance, it was about accountability. And while imprisonment might have been ideal, their fall from grace was a victory in its own right. As the dust settled, Clara found herself reflecting on everything she had endured. The threats, the sleepless nights, the moments when fear threatened to overwhelm her. All of it had been worth it. She often wondered what Emily would think if she could see how far Clara had come. Would she feel proud, relieved, or would she simply smile, knowing her sacrifice hadn't been in vain? One crisp autumn morning, Clara returned to the cemetery where it had all begun. The air smelled of fallen leaves and damp earth, and the golden sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the gravestones. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers, their vibrant colors standing out against the muted tones of the landscape. Kneeling before Emily's headstone, she placed the flowers gently on the ground. "Thank you," Clara whispered, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "You didn't deserve what happened to you, but because of you, things are changing. Your voice mattered then, and it matters now." She stayed there for a while, letting the quiet envelop her. It was strange how peaceful the cemetery felt now, devoid of the eerie tension that had gripped it during the excavation. Perhaps it was because the truth had finally surfaced, lifting the heavy veil of lies that had lingered for so long. Or maybe it was simply because Clara no longer felt afraid. Whatever the reason, She left the graveyard with a renewed sense of purpose. Back in town, life was beginning to shift. New faces appeared at council meetings, ordinary citizens stepping up to take an active role in shaping Black Hollow's future. A committee formed to address transparency and ethics, ensuring that the mistakes of the past wouldn't be repeated. Clara joined the effort, using her knowledge of history and her passion for justice to help guide the town toward healing. It wasn't easy. Old wounds ran deep, and trust took time to rebuild. But progress, however slow, was undeniable. Jonah also played a part in the transformation. Encouraged by Clara, he began painting again, channeling his emotions into his art. His latest works depicted scenes of hope and renewal, sunrises over the hills, children playing in the streets, hands reaching out to one another in solidarity. One painting, titled Emily's Light, captured the essence of what they had fought for, a beacon of truth cutting through the darkness. It became a centerpiece in the town hall, a reminder of the sacrifices made and the victories won. Despite the strides forward, Clara knew the scars of the past would never fully fade. Some families mourned loved ones whose disappearances remained unsolved. Others grappled with guilt over their complicity in maintaining the status quo. But amidst the pain, there was also growth. Conversations that had once been taboo were now openly encouraged. Support groups formed for those affected by corruption or abuse, providing safe spaces to heal and connect. Slowly but surely, Black Hollow was becoming a place where honesty and integrity mattered more than power and profit. Clara's personal life underwent changes too. Her relentless pursuit of justice had earned her both admiration and animosity, but it had also strengthened her relationships with those who truly mattered. Sarah Collins remained a close friend and ally, often visiting Black Hollow to check on the progress of reforms. Together, they brainstormed ideas for preventing similar corruption in other small towns. Jonah, too, became a steadfast companion, his quiet wisdom offering balance to Clara's fiery determination. Though neither of them spoke of it directly, their bond deepened over shared grief and triumph. On the anniversary of Emily's death, Clara organized a memorial service at the Yas Cemetery. Dozens of residents attended, filling the space with warmth and remembrance. Speeches were given, tears shed, and candles lit in honor of those lost to the town's dark history. At the center of it all stood Emily's grave, adorned with fresh flowers and handwritten notes from people expressing gratitude for her bravery. As Clara looked around at the crowd, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was what Emily had wanted. Not vengeance, but change. That night, Clara sat by her window, watching the stars twinkle above the treetops. The town below was quiet, its streets empty, save for the occasional flicker of lamplight. For the first time in months, she felt at ease. The battle had been exhausting, but it had also been enlightening. She had discovered strengths within herself she hadn't known existed, and forged connections that would last a lifetime. Most importantly, she had honored Emily's memory by refusing to let her voice be silenced. As sleep began to claim her, Clara allowed herself a moment of reflection. Justice wasn't perfect, and it rarely came without cost. But it was worth fighting for, not just for the sake of the present, but for the generations yet to come. Somewhere, she hoped, Emily was smiling down on them all, knowing her legacy lived on in the hearts of those who refused to give up. And with that thought, Clara drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring.